All right, welcome back to Biblical Theology, Exegesis, and Hermeneutics, where meaning is always context-driven. I'm your host, John Strazicich, and today we'll be continuing on here in our walk through Romans 9 to 11, and we come to a pretty important stage here. We're coming here to chapter 11, where Paul begins to wrap up his whole argument with Israel. And today we're going to be looking at verses 1 to 10, and where he initially begins to make his foray into, his understanding of the salvation of Israel. Okay, then coming into our text here, as we normally do, we have a scholar here to set the table, and definitely for today, Ross here has the sauce. The rhetorical question in Romans 11:1 marks the beginning of a new stage in Paul's argument. His astounding claim that Israel has both heard and known of God's gracious plan to call the Gentiles to himself in Christ has been sustained by two important witnesses, Moses and Isaiah, who stood forth, as it were, to testify against Israel with their own voices. And we saw this last time here, as he marks here in 10:19 to 21. And we did, Paul left off chapter 10 on a pretty bad note. But having emphasized Israel's stubborn refusal to respond to the God who all day long stretches forth his hands to a disobedient and contrary people, Paul now asks whether Israel's chronic infidelity will finally overcome God's own faithful character and render null and void the promises God made to his people. God has not rejected his inheritance, has he? Could the election of Gentiles be a sign that God has now cast off Israel, the people he once chose to be his very own? So these are some pretty, he sets this up pretty nicely, because that's pretty much the reason why Paul has 9 to 11 is to obviously answer some of the questions that the Roman church had, or would have been prompted after Paul's, glowing statements that he made in chapter 8, that there's nothing that could, separate us from the love of, of God in Christ Jesus. So there was just all these glowing statements that Paul made there in the so-called golden chain, that then they began to say, what happened to Israel, and so this is, Paul is answering this question, and he's taking his time, and he's approaching it from a couple different perspectives, but anyhow, he begins to make his final arguments here he does make his final arguments here in this chapter, but we're just getting started here in verses 1 to 10. Okay, then coming here, as we traditionally do, we will begin with the translation of the text, and it begins here with lego un. Therefore I say, God has not cast off his people, has he? Me genoita, may it never be. For I am also an Israelite from the seed of Abraham, from the tribe of Benjamin. God has not cast off his people whom he has foreknown. Or do you not know what the scripture says in Elijah, how he pleaded to God against Israel? O Lord, they have killed your prophets, and they have torn down your altars, and I alone am left, and they seek my soul. But what does the ha kre matismos, this would be, what does the divine oracle say to him, I have left to myself 7,000 men who have not bowed a knee to Baal. Therefore, in this manner, also in the present time, there has come about a remnant according to the election of grace. But if it is by grace, it is no longer from works, since grace is no longer grace. What then, therefore, or what then? That which Israel will say sought out here for epizetao, this it did not obtain, but the elect obtained it, and the hoi loipoi were hardened, the rest were hardened, just as it is written, God gave to them a spirit of stupor, and eyes not to see, and ears not to hear, until this very day. And David says, let their table become a snare and a trap and a stumbling block, and for a recompense to them. And let their eyes be darkened, so as not to see. And this here, then I think that this is going to be an aorist imperative, and we'll say, bend over thou their back continuously. Okay, that will be our translation for this text. Okay, then coming here, I'll let you guys look at this, but remember going back when we started this, looking at some of the work of Aleti and Gaudens, his student, and what they had to say about the macro structure here of Romans 9 to 11. And I thought it was very good. And see, we're actually in point C here within the book of Romans, when we come here to 9:1 to 11:36. And so within this big macro structure of what we've been working through here, we started off with the exordium, and that was, Paul's pain over Israel's failure to attain God's righteousness. That was back in 9:1 to 5. And then we came to the core of 9 to 11, which is the dispositio. This is the arrangement of Paul's theological material that he presents here in 9:6 to 11:32. And it's arranged theologically, Christologically, and then he comes back again theologically, but mixed with a little of the Christological section to bring his argument to a close, and then it ends with this peroratio, which occurs there at 11:33 to 36. So it has this beginning here and this ending part here, the exordium and the peroratio, and then he has in the middle, sandwiched in the middle, is the meat of everything that we've been looking at, and it's organized around these three, theses statements that he makes here, in 9:6, 10:4, and 11:1 to 2, and I just wanted to remind you of that because that is important. Okay, then coming then to this very important slide here concerning structural analysis. And the text naturally divides itself into the chapter begins with lego here in verse 1, and then it repeats itself again. Paul says again, lego down in verse 11. So scholars have seen that this nicely divides, 11:1 to 32, at least in half. We'll discuss that more later. So we're treating, verses 1 to 10 as a unit, as most scholars recognize this. I would say this macro unit here within chapter 11, and so when we come to then, once we have our boundary, between lego un here in verse 1 and then lego un repeated again in verse 11, therefore I say, this is what Paul says. So this naturally, like we're saying, it naturally divides the text. So now what we need to do then is then within verses 1 to 10, we need to see where else we're going to divide the text. And what I did here is I divided the text into two main units. And the first one, verses 1 to 4, Paul's rhetorical question and answer concerning God's rejection of Israel. And that covers verses 1 to 4. And then what I did down here was once you come to 5, verses 5 following, now this is Paul's contemporary applications. Okay, so it's the application of the scriptural principle that he took here on Paul's midrash from the life of Elijah, in verses in 2 to 4 here. Paul makes a reassertion of his thesis statement that God has not rejected Israel, and then he leads on with a rhetorical question in 2b. Or have you not read, or don't you know? What the scripture says in Elijah. So it goes into this whole thing where Paul then takes up a scriptural reason for God not abandoning Israel. And then, but once you come to verse 5, you look at verse 5, it begins here, therefore in this manner also in the present time there has come about a remnant according to the eklogene caritas, according to the election of grace. So what Paul does then, he gives his contemporary, application of the remnant theology that he's already mentioned, but he makes Paul's remnant theology is now making an application of the Elijah passage. So verse 5 is very pivotal, and everything following it falls also into two units. It's Paul in verses 5 and 6, he pays attention to the remnant theology on a positive note, concerning the the remnant that came about that was in accordance with grace. All right. And then in verses 7 to 10 down here, then what happens here is then now Paul's applying the present implications. Well, if there's a remnant, then what happens to the others who were hardened? Well, then Paul then applies, he gives his answer for that there's a hardening on Israel, and then he gives scriptural, basis for that assertion. So what he does here, so essentially verses 5 to 10 break this all down in, once you come to 5, Paul's giving his contemporary application of the scriptural response that he gave to God's response to Elijah's prayer, that he's not left, there's 7,000 knees that have not yet bowed their knee to Baal. So then Paul then makes this present application. So everything from 5 following is based upon Paul's reassertion and rhetorical scriptural, midrash from the life of Elijah that occurs in verses 2 to 4, and which also is reiterating, Paul's assertion here from his question and answer: God has not, rejected Israel, has he? By no means, meganoita, and then he gives, his own example. Well, hey, look at me, I'm a Jew, I'm from the seed of Abraham, tribe of Benjamin, I'm an Israelite. So Paul kind of gives himself as his own personal life story as a Jew, so that would, that would answer the question that God hasn't forsaken his people, cast off his own people. And then he gives then a scriptural midrash from the life of Elijah that would further cement, Paul's, that God hasn't rejected his people. And then Paul then draws a contemporary application, all beginning in 5 to 10. And it comes in, like I said, verses 5 and 6 are positive, verses 7 to 10 then are negative, okay? They then are the negative answers to the, if there's a remnant, according to the election of grace, well, then what about the rest who are hardened? Well, then that all comes in 7 to 10. But that's still part of the contemporary application. And this all goes back, right when you come to, chapters 9 to 11, there, Paul is finally now tying up everything that he wanted to say in this chapter. So 9 to 11 is a prolonged, protracted statement that he makes on Israel, and concerning God's calling and election of Israel, and so now Paul really begins to lay it out here, so this is very important. And structure here, I'm using conceptual analysis. I'm looking at the conceptual thoughts that occur here in verses 1 to 10. This is why you'll see a lot of scholars, like go 1 to 6, because that incorporates, the positive answer. And then they just put 7 to 11. But really, Paul's contemporary applications of Israel's remnant theology and scriptural basis all began in verses 5 to 7. And it comes in two parts, Paul's first application and Paul's second application. Okay, first one concerns, the remnant. And the second one concerns, Israel's judicial hardening with midrashic basis. Very, very important. Okay, then coming then here to our diagrammatical analysis here. We have our base, begins here with Lego un here. So un here is on stilts because this is an inferential conjunction, summing up prior, what he just got done saying, in the last chapter. He painted a pretty rotten picture of Israel. So it naturally then it leads in here. Therefore I say, God has not forsaken his people, has he? He hasn't cast off his people, has he? And so may here, the interrogative use of used interrogatively here, expects the answer no. And he gives that in bold relief by using the optative form here, with this phrase meganoita, and this is, I think he uses this like 10 times in Romans. So this, this just means may it never be, and it's a very, very, strong negation here in Greek, by, grammaticalizing this, this by the optative here, and so this is this famous phrase meganoita. And I typically translate it, but may it never be. And then he goes into a basis clause, gar, for I am also an Israelite here. So he has this, predicate nominative here. So Paul, he's as some of these very famous preachers are stating that, this is Exhibit A. Paul gives, his own pedigree here of his own personal life, that I am an Israelite. So this is this Paul's using his own life to substantiate the claim that of course God has never cast off his people, and so then he gives himself, and then he describes himself further as being from the seed of Abraham, because remember the Israelites, Abraham is the origin of the Israelite nation. It all begins with Abraham. And then he further, shows that he's from the tribe of Benjamin. And so these are the two southern tribes that basically, that Benjamin ended up staying with Judah, and while the 10 other, tribes were taken captive in 722 BC. And so Paul takes some pride here in being a Benjaminite. And so for Paul's, he begins here with this, question and answer here, as we have in our, laid out for our structural analysis. God has not forsaken his people, has he? And scholars have noted that, this is Paul's most likely using, the basis for his question stems here from the authoritative, canonical medium of the Old Testament, as Bachton would say, and we would find here, in Psalm 93 verse 14, Kilo Yitosh Adonai Amo V'nachalato lo ya'atzov, and this says, for Yahweh has not forsaken his people, and he has not left neither has he left his inheritance. And then that's in the MT, and if we look at the LXX rendering of this, the Lord shall not cast off his people, and neither shall he forsake his inheritance. So this comes in the Yahweh Malak Psalms here, starting here 93. Yahweh reigns here. Some of these kingly texts here, that the psalmists, or how the psalms are organized here. They begin here in 93. And then another statement, almost identical, comes here from 1 Samuel 12:22. The Lord shall not cast off his people on account of his great name, because the Lord has received you, I guess, kindly to himself for a people. But so likewise here, the Lord shall not cast off his people. So probably here, both texts here have kurios here, and as most scholars say, Paul substituted theos here, not to confuse kurios with Christ, but to leave this, with the subject of God the Father here. That's who's, Paul wants to frame it that way, and not confuse it with kurios here, which would lead one to think that Paul's thinking of Christ. So anyhow, so this is an assertion that the Old Testament makes, that of course God's not going to, cast off his people. He will chastise them. That's for sure. I mean, that's just read the Old Testament, pick it up. But Paul denies that God would ever, completely abandon his people. Now he's going to explain all that he wanted to start off there in chapter 9. It's all going to start to take shape. Now, only part of it's going to take shape here in verses 1 to 10. Okay? But when you get to, verses 11 following, then you're going to get, the final, the real question that they were asking in 9 to 11 that Paul wanted to address was that, well, gosh, did God just, forget about the Jews and now he's just gone on to the Gentiles? And because when you read the Old Testament texts, okay, the OAN, the oracles against the nations, they all then at the end mentioned a very glorious future salvation for Israel. Where that Yahweh, reigns forever. I mean, that's the theme of the book of Isaiah, that Yahweh will reign forever from Zion. Just look at the remarks of Marvin Sweeney. Okay, so Yahweh's, reign from Zion, eternal reign from Zion, is the glorious future. Just look at Isaiah chapter 2. You can look there. And then beginning, with chapter 40 following. And all the prophets have a section, like Amos ends with this, Joel ends with this, Zechariah ends with this, all the, Ezekiel has this. So, all the major prophets have this glorious future that and Paul, Paul's been, has been called him, himself, he his own language, preempted the thought that he needs to take this up. Whether or not this was actually something that, Paul needed to address this in his, his apologia here to the Roman church. He wanted to present his gospel. So Israel is huge. Well, what about the Jews? So Paul's answering that here. And once you get to 11:11 following, then Paul's going to address this future glorious reign of the Messiah, that that the deliverer will come out of Zion, and all after the times of the Gentiles are completed, then all Israel will be saved. So Paul does eventually, agree with the Old Testament texts, but people just didn't see what was the church age. Okay, they really didn't see that clearly within the Old Testament, and so in chapters 9 to 11, Paul addresses this to in the fashion that he does. Okay, then moving along here, in our diagrammatical analysis, we're going to look at this compound sentence here, and it's bound together by this this disjunctive use of this particle a here, which we translate or. And Paul begins his text here in verse 2, uk aposata ha theos ton laon autu han pra egno. So this is what he says up here, and then he's going to bring up a second statement here, or what leads into a rhetorical question, or do you not know what the scripture says in Elijah? And then we go into a host clause here of manner, how he interceded to God, or he pleaded to God against Israel. And then this is going to lead then Paul into a scriptural midrash here, and we'll be looking at the, at the Elijah story, out of the book of Kings. But he begins here, with un here, like he Paul loves, putting in here these these conjunction, particles here, and this definitely, is he's trying to re-sum up here what he just stated. So this is a reassertion here. God has not forsaken his people. So God is our subject. It's in the subject, slot here, and then our, aorist middle verb here, aposata, from, what is this, apotheo, or if you look at the middle, apotheomai. And God has not forsaken his people. And then he has this relative clause here, whom he has foreknown. And that's going to jog our memory back here to, back to the 8th chapter here, to, what people refer to as a golden chain. But we know that, and we'll translate this in one of two ways, that he works all things for the good to those who love God, to those who are called according, we'll just say, to his purpose, because whom he foreknew, so here's our verb, praegno, whom he foreknew, he also predestined to be conformable to the image of his Son, in order for him, that is Christ, to be the firstborn among many brethren. Now whom he predestined, these he also called, and whom he called, these he also justified, and whom he justified, these he also glorified. So this is what we call the golden chain here. And don't worry, Paul will break the chain here when he comes here in chapter 11 here to verses 21 following, okay? And just in case you can't, you got to read it. Remember, meaning is always context driven. Just go here and you'll find out that this Paul's thinking just like he's writing in Philippians, after he says 1:6, he says in verse 7, it's only just for me to think this way concerning you, because I have you in my heart. So we're to think of that people will that whom God did begin something, he will finish it. Okay. Now, we've all know the book of Revelation, that you could be spit out of his mouth. So just don't tempt God. Okay. But Paul's definitely not a once saved, always saved person. If you have any doubts, just go to 11:21 following, and you'll find out. These are divine passives, by the way. This is what God will do. Okay. To those who are disobedient, after whom, those whom he foreknew. Okay. Definitely according to chapter 8's understanding. Now, the way that Paul uses here, praegnon here in verse 2 is completely different. Remember, meaning is always context driven. And to show you this, I wanted to just move on to another scholar who hails, from England. Okay, then to just quote C.E.B. Cranfield, and it will settle the question here. And so we'll look to what he said here. Uk apo sata hatheos ton laon autu, God has not forsaken his people, a solemn and explicit denial, all the more emphatic for being expressed in the very words which were used in the question. So this is just, Paul's making he's making a reassertion here of the claim that God has not forsaken his people. Then this relative clause, han praegno, the significance of whom he foreknew. The significance of the addition of the relative clause has been disputed. Boy, I'll say. Calvin understood as having a restrictive sense, limiting the reference of Tonla'an Autu, his people, to those members of the people of Israel who are the objects of God's secret election. Now he's going to destroy Calvin. But in spite of the fact that verses 4 to 7 do go on to differentiate between an elect remnant and the rest of the people, this interpretation is most unlikely, for it is hardly to be disputed that in verse 1, his people refers to Israel as a whole, and it is unnatural to give it a different sense in verse 2. That's so true. So to take Calvin's, his sense here, Calvinists are just, they're classic eisegetes. They read into the text what's not there. So they just import, they just freight in all their Calvinism once they see, this particular word. They just, they import all of, chapter 8, whom God foreknew, he also predestined. They just take that carte blanche here. But remember, meaning is always context driven. It's driven by the context. The context determines what the meaning is. And so definitely the meaning here of Tonla'an Autu is people whom he foreknew. It's the same in verse 2 as it is in verse 1. And so we know that Paul's talking generally about the nation in verses 1 and 2. Of course that's true. And he says, we take it then that the relative clause refers to the general election of the people as a whole and indicates a further ground for denying that God has cast off his people. The fact that God foreknew them, deliberately joined them to himself in faithful love, excludes the possibility of his casting them, and we'll put all off. Okay, so remember here, Charles, Cranfield, C.E.B. Cranfield here, is also followed by, a staunch Calvinist, Douglas Moo. He even had to capitulate to C.E.B. Cranfield. Of course he did. He didn't want to look like a fool. Whereas most of all the other Calvinists, man, that when they come here, they see this, they can't do, they're eisegetes, okay? I meant meaning is always driven by the context. And we're just following common sense here with C.E.B. Cranfield. So I just left you an example. I mean, Schreiner here, he's an awesome, exegete, of course, but he takes the typical, Calvinist interpretation here. You can read Tom here, where he left the reservation on this interpretation. Okay, so this here is a little snippet here taken from the commentary of Douglas Moo, a Calvinist. Whom Schreiner should have followed, Douglas Moo's, he should have followed his lead here. So you can read this, but, it's just, he's going to follow Cranfield, and then he restates that, furthermore, verse 28, which appears to reassert the point Paul makes here in verse 2, ascribes election to Israel as a nation also. So this is, Calvinists, are not all eisegetes, and Doug Moo distinguishes himself amongst the most of the Calvinist interpreters. Okay, then coming then to this slide, we'll look here at the dialogue that Paul presents between Elijah and Yahweh, back at Mount Sinai at Horeb, where Elijah had fled to, escaping Jezebel after the Mount Carmel event, and this is 1 Kings 19, verse 13, and the text begins here: Vayehi Kishmoah Eliyahu, vayalet panav be'adarto, vayetze vayamod petak hame'ara, v'hine elav kol, vayomer malacha po Eliyahu, vayomer kanoa kineti, Ladonai Elohei Zavaot ki atzevu v'ritcha b'nei Yisrael et mizbechotecha harasu ve'et nevi'echa haregu v'charev va'ivater ani levadi. And then lastly, here it says, Vayivakshu et nafshi lekachta. So this just says, and it came about when Elijah wrapped his face, with his mantle. He went out and stood at the entrance of the cave, and behold, a voice came to him and said, "What are you doing here, Elijah?" And he said, "I am very zealous." So this takes up the the infinitive absolute with a PL. I'm very zealous for Yahweh, the God of hosts, for the sons of Israel have forsaken your covenant, and they have torn down your altars, and they have killed your prophets with the sword, and I alone am left, and they seek my soul to take it. So this is how Elijah responds here to God. After he stood in the cave and he heard all the he saw the great fire and the earthquake, and then he heard the cold demama daka, this sound of a thin silence, or this small whisper. And then he presents his text. So when Paul then is quoting from this, so Paul he has to then remember when typically when we're going to quote something, Paul has to frame it to fit his context. So Paul adds here, when we actually look at the text, he has kuriai, so he has the vocative here, "O Lord." So this is how when Paul quotes, he sticks in "O Lord" here. And then what he does, so that that's not in the text, but he needs this for framing, and it's fine. This is basically what is going on, because he's addressing Yahweh. But note here that you have to frame it. So there's this is the process, the transformation of a text through its from its when he goes to quote it. You have to then conform it to Paul's particular presentation of it. So this is all that's going on here. And note here that there is some selective. This is selective in how he goes about. He doesn't record everything, and he puts first. He says they have killed your prophets. Okay, so, he says, in the text up here, he says, "I'm very zealous for, Yahweh, the God of hosts, for the sons of Israel have forsaken your covenant." So that's completely eliminated. They have torn down your altars. That's going to be put in the second place here, okay? And then they have killed your prophets with the sword. That's what Paul puts in first. So whether he's doing this by memory or it's just selective, that this is what he's doing here. Each interpreter here is going to then try to understand this. So this is just I could say that this is probably selective he's just selecting it. He doesn't need to include everything, just the gist of it. Whether or not it's in the order that was presented in the text, that doesn't matter. So this is just appropriation and resignification. And then, he states here that I alone have left, and they seek my soul. So this is, this is what Paul does here, is that he's just focusing in on, that they have killed your prophets. So he's talking about martyrdom, and then tearing down altars, and that he alone is left. And so this is just, this is beginning here of the dialogue that Paul's presenting here between Elijah and Yahweh. Okay, then coming then to this particular slide here, we will go ahead and take a look at our text, and we'll read the text and kind of explain some of this diagrammatical analysis. We have Allah here, which is it's a conjunctive, and it is adversative. It has a very strong adversative sense here. It's very contrastive. But so this is, remember that we're in verse 4 here. We're in now it's the divine reply to the pleading that Isaiah had made to Yahweh. That, hey, look, God, they've killed your prophets, they tore down your altars, and they seek my life. But when the divine response comes, Paul has in here, but so that something very contrastive is about to happen, and so we have it begins with an interrogative, a question, but what does we'll say the divine oracle here for ha krematismos, and this noun form is a hapax legomenon in the New Testament. Usually we have the participial form of kramatizo that usually takes up this place here, but we have the noun form here. And then, so the question is, but what does the oracle say to him, or the divine oracle say to him? So this basically functions as an introductory speech report formula in question form, in rhetorical question form. And then we go into, the quotation here from 1 Kings 19. I have left to myself, 7,000 men, and then we have this relative clause, who have not bowed a knee te Baal. So this should be masculine here, but this is, in the Hebrew Bible, Baal was, and in Second Temple Judaism, they interchanged this with Boshet, which is shame. And then in for the Septuagint for shame, we have ice kune, and so this here is feminine. So this is why we're going to have, Paul's going to have this feminine article here that goes in front of this masculine noun Baal. And this may, this could be Paul could be following a different text form here other than the Septuagint, or there is another text form that has this feminine form here, but I don't think we need to get that deep into it. But so the divine response is that, hey, it's not all a loss. You're not the last one, and remember. So this is all done in benefit, for Romans. This is what Romans 9 to 11 is all about. Okay, it's exactly, Paul's creating, he found the text then to make a typology for the present time, and that's what he's about to do here. And so that when you come to verse 5 following, then we have the application of what all of this means, both good and bad, concerning Israel, okay, concerning those who have bowed the knee to Baal and concerning those who have not. We have the elect, and then we have the non-elect, the others, so to speak, as our passage picks up. But this is very, very crucial, and if we look at the whole context of the divine response, and we have down here, Vayomer Adonai Elav Lake Shuv Lidarkecha Midbara Damasek Uvata Umashakta et Chazael Lemelech al Aram Ve'et Yehu ben Nimshi Timshak Lemelech al Yisrael Ve'et Elisha ben Shaphat Me'avel Mechola Timshak Linavi Tachtecha. So he's got, in your place. So now, he asked for his life to be taken from him. So this is a little hint here that something's going to, transpire here. But we know that Elijah didn't die. He was caught up to heaven. And so then verse 13 goes, Vihaya hanimlat mecherev Chazael yamit Yehu. V'hanimlat mecherev Yehu yamit Elisha. And it'll be the one who escapes from the sword of Hazael, Yehu will kill, and the one who escapes from the sword of Yehu, Elisha shall kill. So the prophets do have other things other than speaking smooth things of of grace and mercy. Kind of like what Peter did. He spoke Annas and Sapphira. I mean Ananias and Sapphira to death. You can remember that in Acts, chapter 5. Just to jog your memory there. And then, then by the way, Elijah, V'hish arti b'Yisrael shiv'at alafim kol habir kayim asher lo kareu laba'al v'chol hapeh asher lo nashak lo. I have, left in Israel 7,000. All the knees are, we have to supply men, 7,000 men, all the knees which have not bowed down to Baal, and every mouth that has not kissed him. Or we could say it referring to the idol. But this is the text, and he does eliminate here the last part of the quote, all who have kissed him. But I have left. This is a plus. So Paul's adding, I have left to myself or for myself, and then 7,000 men whom have not bowed a knee to Baal. And just so that you could see, I wanted to keep the whole text here so you can kind of see what the whole divine response was. And so Paul's being selective, and he should be here, as he wants to stay. He's staying right on course of the topic of what's going on here in Romans 9 to 11. So it's very important about what he does keep and what he doesn't keep. Okay, so he's just highlighting what what he's about to expound on. All of this now has set Paul up for verses 5 to 10. And what's going to happen here in 5 to 6, you have the good answer about the remnant, and then in 7 to 10, you've got you've got whoever was not a part of the remnant, the others, those who are hardened. He addresses that part of that other half of the topic in verses 7 to 10. But all of this up to 4 here has set Paul up in the way we've looked at the text. Everything that follows is now the application of this text, and then he makes the application to the present time in both cases, in verses 5 to 6 and then in verses 7 to 10. This is all in the present time, and he gives the application, and he's beginning to talk plainly about how he started off chapter 9, which was very important, that Paul was grieving in his heart over the lack of faith in the Messiah of his fellow countrymen according to the flesh. Okay, and Paul wanted to exchange his soul for these other people, and so that was very touching to see that in Paul's prayer for Israel. So now he's been taking his time here, and now he's beginning to address this. But this is the key text, 1 Kings 19, and the prayer here of Elijah and the divine response, the ha krematismos. So the divine oracle that comes, I have left for myself 7,000 men who have not bowed the knee to Baal. Okay, in this slide I wanted to give you a little historical, cultural understanding of the phraseology that we saw there, in the text from Kings, where Yahweh told Elijah that I have reserved for myself 7,000 men who have not bowed their knees to Baal nor have kissed him. Okay, and so this here is the black obelisk here of Shalmaneser III. And this dates, we know this the second register dates to 841. And that would be what you're seeing here on the main picture here, right here. This is King Jehu bowing before King Shalmaneser, the Assyrian monarch. And this is depicted right here in the second register up here on the top. And this is a detailed picture, and you can see that he's bowing his knee and kissing his feet. So this is what that whole application is that you would bow to the king and kiss in submission and homage to your overlord, and the same type of understanding is applied to the worship of Baal, that the worshiper would bow down to the idol and kiss the idol, and this here is showing us in bold relief, in a historical cultural sense, of what that all meant. And here we go. We're just showing you here that this here is the another picture here of the black obelisk, and if this is in cuneiform form here, and this here is the register, and this is Jehu right here, and this is showing us it's just another picture of this obelisk showing Jehu bowing down and kissing the feet of King Shalmaneser. Okay, then coming here then to this particular unit here, we're going to look here. We're looking here at verses 5 and 6 here at the present time, And this is also the next big section within this unit here that begins in verse 5. And let's just read this for context, and then we're going to go back and look at our structural analysis to see how that squares. Therefore, in the same manner also at the present time there has come about a remnant according to the election of grace. But if by grace, it is no longer of works, since grace is no longer grace. Okay, so what's very important here to let us know that we have a turn of events here. We have this this coordinated conjunction of inference. We have un here, okay, in the post-positive position, and we have this adverbial use of the demonstrative from hutos, or from hutos, and we have the adverbial form is hutos, as we have here, and so this so we would translate there, therefore in this manner. And then we have this other temporal clause here within this, within this prepositional phrase, and we have the adjunctive use here of kai, also at the present time. Okay, so therefore, in this manner, there has come about a remnant also in the present time, according to the election of grace. So we need to highlight this, and then we're going to go step back and look at our structure. Okay, so looking here at our structure at point 2 here, Paul's contemporary applications, Israel's remnant theology and scriptural bases. And this takes up all of 5 to 10. So you need to note here that point 1 here was Paul's rhetorical question and answer concerning God's rejection of Israel. That took up all of verses 1 to 4. We had the rhetorical question. It's not that God has cast away his people, has he? And then the emphatic negation was meganoita. And then he gives a restatement of that, after he, Paul first then, gives the basis of the answer of Paul's own personal life. Hey, look, I'm an Israelite of the seed of Abraham, tribe of Benjamin. Then this is where he makes his reassertion here, is in 2 to 4. Of the principle that God has certainly not, rejected his people, and then he adds the relative clause, whom he foreknew. So this is talking about the nation as a whole. It's not talking about, the elect within the elect or whatever. This is just talking about the nation as a whole. Has just look at verse 28. Okay, they are general. That's the general election of of the nation that Paul was talking about in chapter 9, okay, that the people, not that God chose the nation of Israel, okay, and it whittled down, it wasn't Ishmael, it was Isaac, and it wasn't Esau, but it was Jacob who God chose. So it works through Paul worked through that back in 9/11, okay, and he whittled it down that the covenant nation was going to be from the promised seed. Now this seed, Paul's from the seed of Abraham and from the tribe of Benjamin. Now there are fellow countrymen, of Paul that are Jewish people like him that are a part of this nation that God elected to be the custodians of his covenant. Now, what Paul's going to then describe here, he's answering the question of, gosh, well, why is there so many Israelites that, are not believing? And then Paul said, not all those of Israel are true Israel. Okay, so there's a remnant within the remnant, and there's the elect within the elect, and so we'll see this. And if you have any doubt, just go to verse 32. Okay, God has shut up all under sin in order that he might have grace upon all. So whoever the all is that God shut up in sin is the same all that God showed grace to. So that's just going to totally trash theologies. I mean, Calvinism just got burnt up, thank God. I mean, verse 32 is devastating, man. I mean, it's devastating to Calvinism, because whoever the all that God shut up in sin is the same all that God showed mercy to. So no one's getting around that. Okay, everybody's shown mercy from God. Nobody's gonna go to hell that hasn't been shown some degree of mercy, and it's different with everybody. But remember, we have a God who sits on a throne and he judges righteously. Okay, so just hold on there. Okay, so now when we come here to verses 5 to 10, this is where Paul makes his first application concerning the remnant according to the election of grace. And then his second application is the judicial hardening and midrashic bases in 7 to 10. So he first addresses here the Paul's side of the saved Jewish people, the remnant, and then the rest here are hardened. So this is all talking about Israel. So this is where Paul's making a distinction that not all Israel is Israel, in the core sense of the nation, the chosen nation itself. And we saw that the nation, went through some whittling. It's not all the seed of Abraham, is the chosen seed. It's the seed of promise. Okay, so it whittled down from Ishmael to Isaac, and then in the next generation, when Isaac, and Rebekah came along, well, then now, the firstborn was Esau, and then secondborn that came out was Jacob, the heel catcher. Took him by the heel, and God chose Jacob over the firstborn. So it's not just this now. That's all the seed of Abraham. Esau has got more claim to be the seed of the seed of Abraham because he's the firstborn. But God chose Jacob. So the covenant nation was to go through Jacob, and that's why Paul says, just as Scripture says, Jacob I love and Esau I hated. He quotes Malachi 1,500 years later, after the boys were born, to Rebekah. So I just wanted, but I'm saying all that here to kind of give a little, to fill in all that's really taking place here, because now, hutos un, therefore, in this manner, in the present time. Okay, so now Paul's he's making his typological, application of the previous scripture from 1 Kings 19. And he's bringing all that, and this is all summing up everything he said in chapter 9 all the way to here. It's all being summed up, and he's he's giving it piecemeal, a little bit here, a little bit there, and now he's beginning to state his case, but it's not full, not yet. It's not going to come till we're going to have 2 more sessions here, in this unit here of chapter 11. Okay, then coming here to this slide, diagrammatically here, we'll be looking here at verses 5 and 6. And we have un here on stilts outside of the sentence, and this is our coordinated conjunction of inference, which draws the inference from the, from the previous, unit that we just saw of the divine response. And so the sentence then follows, therefore, in this manner, we'll have to come all the way down here to Gegonen. There has come about also in the present time a remnant according to the election of grace. So lema here is remnant. This is our subject. The perfect here use of ginomai, Gegonen here, is stative. So it's talking about a state. There has come about a state of, there has come about a remnant in this manner. Now in the present time also according to the election of grace. So we have noon here, and hutas. These are all, this noon here is used adverbally here for the now present time, and hutos here is functioning together with un. Therefore, in this manner, a remnant has come about in the present time, also in the present time. And then we have another, prepositional phrase here, according to the election of grace. So this election has come about in the manner, or from its source is grace. So we would rather probably say it that way. And then the next part of the sentence, Paul has a lot of ellipses taking place here, and he does it for short rapidity and succinctness of speech. And if we look up here, but if by grace is no longer of works, since grace is no longer grace. But if we're having to diagrammatically structure this, you're going to have to do a lot of fill-in, and you'll see here that we got a lot of fill-in here. So it would start off here. You could either say now or but. If election is by grace, election is no longer from works, and then we have this epi clause here that's causal, since grace is no longer grace. And so it ends here with this basis or causal clause here to define what grace is. It's no longer of work. So then this takes up everything that came out of starting at 9:12. That the election. We'll reread this. When we see now he's using the word the elect, according to the the election of grace, this remnant has come about. So Paul, by use of anaphora, he's reusing words he already took up in Romans chapter 9. But now he's further fine tuning everything. And he's using the term election and the term here remnant, and both of these are coming. Paul has these here in chapter 9. The remnant theology he takes up in 9:27, and then the election he takes up in 9:12, and all of this here stems from Isaiah chapter 10, where Paul was getting all of this information from, and we should probably look at this. V'haya b'yom hahu lo Yosef od she'ar Yisrael ufilei tat Beit Yisrael lehish sha'ain al makehu v'nish'an al Adonai kedosh Yisrael be'emet. So, and it will come about in that day that the remnant of Israel and the escapee of the house of Israel shall no longer lean all Makehu upon the one who struck him, but Vinishon, but shall lean all Adonai, shall lean upon Yahweh, the Holy One of Israel, in truth. And then he says, and the remnant shall return, the remnant of Jacob, to the mighty God. For if your people, O Israel, are as the sand of the sea, a remnant shall return to it. A destruction is determined, overflowing with tzedakah, overflowing with righteousness. So this is where, Isaiah and the other Old Testament prophets are taking up the idea that there is this remnant within Israel. And you can see this really clear in the book of Ezekiel as well. And as well as in Jeremiah. But this remnant theology is, Paul used, this material here to create, he took this up here in Isaiah. So Paul's now returning to these key words. Okay, this key word remnant. Well, it comes directly here out of Isaiah 10, and then Paul took that up, here when he was in 9:27 of Romans. Isaiah cried out, concerning Israel, if the number of the sons of Israel is the sand of the sea, a remnant shall be saved. That's the Septuagint text, and we can see it reads a little different here in the MT, but it basically says the same thing. It's remnant. And there the word is hupa lema, and we just have here lema here. And that's descriptive of here, and I just wanted to explain how, with all of these ellipses that Paul went through to get this short and quick, statements, e de kariti, ukete ex ergon, ap or epe he charis, uketi genetai charis. But if by grace, it is no longer of works, since grace is no longer grace. And so then Paul's just qualifying everything he said, and then the election language here does differ a little bit here. Maybe from go back to Romans 9, and while yet we have to supply the term boys here, before they were born, and neither having done anything good or bad, in order that the purpose of God might remain according to election, not of works, but of the one who calls. It was said to her, that is to Rebekah, the greater shall serve the younger, just as it is written, Jacob I loved and Esau I hated. So we talked about all of that there. But now this is the, talking about the election of the nation coming through the lineage here of Jacob, the second born, rather than Esau. Okay? And it was God's choice, it was God's call. And looking through the corridor of times, just as it was written, Jacob I loved, Esau I hated. He saw that down, by his foreknowledge, he saw that Esau wouldn't have been a good choice, for there to even be a remnant, left within Esau, because God basically, he genocided Edom, okay, because of their wickedness. And that nation no longer exists. But obviously Israel does. So we saw that the election stood here, and that was according to God. And in this one here, we are going to see that it's the election is in accordance with grace. And if, like I said, if you got a problem, just go to verse 32 of this chapter. Paul sums up his whole teaching Therefore, God has shut up all under sin in order that he may have grace upon all. So as many people are as that God shut up in sin, and I think that's all. There's nobody, it's everybody. Okay, then likewise the next word all is it's not partitive. It's the same all that was the all that was shut up in sin. Well, then God showed grace to all, and that's how the whole thing ends. So just flush your Calvinism down the toilet. Okay, then we're coming down here to the final stretch here in verses 7 to 8 here with the interpretation of the others and the hoi loipoi here. Okay, the others who were hardened. If you're not a part of the elect, then according to Paul, amongst the Jews, there's the hoi polloi, and this here in context. Remember, meaning is always driven by the context here, and this is plain. It's unbelieving Israel. Okay, and so Paul's making a second summation point here. What therefore is it? Okay, or what then? Therefore, what then? Okay, so we have this. We have un here on stilts, which is a coordinated conjunction of inference. What then? So we have Paul's not done explaining. He explained the positive part, the elect, but what about the hoi polloi? Well, the hoi polloi comes here in verses 7 to 8. That's why verses 5 to 10 is a unit, and verses 5 to 6 is the positive statement about the elect, and then verses 7 to 10, in the present time, the present application, the typology of, the 7,000 men that did not bow their knee to Baal. Those were referring here then typologically to the elect within Israel itself, the Israel within Israel, the elect within the elect. And if you just go to verse 28 if you want to talk about the elect, right? It says that they are enemies on your account, according to the gospel, but on the other hand, for the sake of the elect, they're beloved. Okay, so don't. You just remember, meaning is always context driven. The context is 9, the whole all of 9 to 11, and everything is tightened up here in chapter 11 where we're at, and we're not done yet. But by the time you get to verse 32, all the air has been popped out of Calvinism. It doesn't exist. Thank God Paul wasn't a Calvinist. Therefore, what then? That which Israel was seeking out, we could say, however we're to, translate epizete here, I think seeking out here, what that which Israel was seeking out, this it did not obtain, but the elect obtained, and the rest were hardened. So we're just going to deal with that here. So the elect obtained it. This is talking about the elect within Israel. We're not talking. This doesn't include anything to do with Gentiles. This is all about Israel. Remember, it's God-forsaken Israel. That's how this thing started off. Paul will he will deal with with the Gentiles in the next chapter. I mean in the next in 11 following. Okay, we'll get that. That'll all come up then. But now we have to deal with what then. So this is just what then. the issue, the question hasn't, Paul's saying here, well, okay, we dealt with the elect, but hey, the whole thing, the whole chapter of 9-11 is not about the elect. It's about, why is Israel, rejecting their Messiah? Okay, so now we're talking about the hoi polloi here, the God's people whom he foreknew. Okay, he foreknew that there would be the elect within the elect. Okay, that there were going to be those who were foreknown amongst God's own elect people. Okay, and that's the way you have to interpret when you look down at verse 28. Okay, there is an elect within the elect, and this proves it. Here's the elect right here, but the elect obtained it. Okay, that this is the Israel within the Israel, or the elect within the elect. Just look. Where's the rest of the elect? Well, just look down there at verse 28. Okay, on account of the gospel, they're your enemies, but on account of the fathers, on account of election, they're beloved of the fathers. That's what it says in verse 28. Okay, so there's the elect within the elect. But this this relative here, ha and tuta, these are neuters, and what exactly is it referring to? We could just go with soterion, salvation. It could, that's the ultimate, but they're seeking the law of righteousness, but all that would have been masculine, nomos, the law of righteousness. So the neuter here just could refer to salvation. That's ultimately what the Jews were trying to establish their own righteousness, their own salvation by their works. Okay, so it's some people are going to say this is the righteousness of righteousness here. They were seeking out righteousness. That's fine. It's just the concept. It's the neuter concept of everything that's involved here. And I think just leave this kind of open here. There's room for play here. Okay, and interpreters will take their side, and I'm sure all of them have a point to make, and I'm not gonna it's just one of these areas where we can fill it in. Okay, and the rest here were hardened, and that's the rest of God's people whom he foreknew. God hardened them. Okay, and then he goes into this kathos, this just as clause here, just as it is written, and then the subject form here is that God gave to them a spirit of stupor unto the present day, eyes so as not to see, and ears so as not to hear. Okay, so now Paul's here. He's quoting a little bit of Isaiah and some of Deuteronomy here, 29, and we'll look how Paul. This is what we would call a midrashic complex. That's what this is. It's the combination of one or two sources into one unified sentence or idea, where he combines two scriptures together to make to build up the motif of what it meant for the rest to be hardened. Okay, so what we're doing here is that this is our scripture down here, and the rest were hardened just as it is written. And then, so we're going to look at the phraseology here. God gave to them a spirit of stupor, eyes so as not to see, and ears so as not to hear. And this is purpose, infinitive of purpose, in order not to see and not to hear, until this very day. Until this very day. That's the way we should translate. Heos te se meron he meros. And so there's some changes. Definitely, there's some changes here in this temporal clause, heos te se meron he meros, because this up here in the Septuagint would state, heos tes he meras tautes, until this day. So Paul's going to make it, hey, it's happening down to this very day. So he's zeroing in on the on the hardness of Israel, that it's right up until right as he's writing this. Okay. But we'll see here that this spirit of stupor language, this is coming out of Isaiah 29:10, okay, which is going to be this text here, okay, in the MT and the LXX. And all of that is, this judicial hardening language is going to stem from the call of Isaiah classically, and Isaiah 6:9-10, which is repeated all over the Gospels. We will let's just look here at Deuteronomy. We'll kind of get the context. Vayikra Moshe El Kol Yisrael Vayomer Alehem Atem Ra'item Et Kol Asher Asa Adonai Le'enechem Be'eretz Mitzrayim Le'paro U Lechol Avadav U Lechol Artzo Hamasot Hagedolot Asher Ra'u Enecha Ha'otot V'hamofetim Hagedolim Hahem. So this just says, and Moses called to all Israel, and he said to them, you have seen all which Yahweh did to your eyes in the land of Egypt, to Pharaoh and to all his servants and to his land. And we'll say, these, the great Masot here, the great testings, trials, which your eyes saw, those great signs and wonders. But now we come here to 3. This is where he's quoting from. But Yahweh has not given you a heart to know, eyes to see, nor ears to hear until this day. Okay, and then we can see this here, that the Lord God has not given to you a heart to know and eyes to see and ears to hear until this day. But what he does, remember, he's tacking on to this that God gave, to them a spirit of stupor. This language here comes out of Isaiah, be astonished and astounded, and basically, and be blinded, be drunk, but not with wine, and stagger, but not with strong drink. For Yahweh has poured out upon you a ruach tardema, a spirit of deep sleep, or a spirit of stupor. And it says that he has shut your eyes along with the prophets. He has shut up, he has covered up over your heads those, I guess, who are seers. And then it goes on to about that they can't even read a sealed book. Okay, we don't need to get into there, but I think what we want to do here is that what happens here, this pneuma kata nux zeos, this here, the spirit of stupor, he's pulling this language out of Isaiah 29:10, and he's tacking it on to the language, edokin autois ha theos. He's pulling this language here, and here he has the Lord God has not given. Now this is in the second person plural to you, so he has to remember he through its through a passage's displacement, and then going through the process of its distillation and recontextualization, it has to transform itself to the sits and Laban of Paul's particular situation. So he has to then put it in the third person plural. God gave to them. So and so not he doesn't want to say to you, which would be to the Gentiles he's writing to primarily now. But God gave to them, that is the hoi polloi here, a spirit of stupor. Okay, and then he's it's picking up then from Deuteronomy, eyes that do not see and ears that do not hear until this very day. So and so this is explaining the process of judicial hardening, and this is very important. It's not total. It is temporary, but it can and for the most part it is total, because if the nation continues in trying to establish their own righteousness, and not a righteousness by faith, well, then they're no longer going to obtain the salvation they were seeking out by trying to do works of the law themselves. Christ did all that. You remember, you don't need to go over the other side of the sea or go up to heaven. Why? Well, because Christ did all those calisthenics for us on the cross. They were accomplished on the cross. And that's where God's righteousness is now freely given by grace to all who call upon him. All who call upon the name of the Lord shall be saved. So that's why I went with soterion salvation for these for the neuters that we saw there in those relative clauses, and in the demonstrative tuta that we looked in the previous slide. But what's important here to see that this spirit of stupor here, he's taking straight out of the Septuagint text of Isaiah 29:10, and then he's making this conformable to the present passage, and we have these and so he gave to them a spirit of stupor, and that was in order so that they couldn't see with their eyes and they couldn't hear with their ears until this very day. And Paul quotes this again in 2 Corinthians chapter 4, that the veil remains unto this very day, the reading of Moses. Okay, this is very important, and this is all about judicial hardening. This is a very, very general statement talking about the hoi polloi, so we will move on. Okay, then coming here then to coming in here for landing 9 and 10, and David says, let their trapeza, their table, become for a snare and for a trap and for a stumbling block and for a recompense, and let their eyes be darkened so as not to see, and bend their backs continuously. Bend thou their backs continuously, because this is an imperative, an aorist imperative here. So bend thou their backs continuously, together here. So that he wants them hunchbacked, okay? And he doesn't want their eyes to see nothing. And then their table, their own table fellowship will become a snare and a trap and a stumbling block and a recompense. So this is coming straight out of what Psalm, I think, 69. And so Paul just loads up here, snare and trap and stumbling block and recompense, and this is and he said, let their table become this, and let their eyes become this. These are passives, right? And then this is active, and then now he's requesting God, bend thou their backs, over continually, continuously. So this temporal, this dia pontos, is just idiomatic phrase for continuously, constantly, something like that. This is this is judicial hardening of the hoi polloi within Israel, who are not the elect, who were seeking out salvation, through another means other than Christ. They wanted to, get their own righteousness, without Christ, and that's just not going to make it. Okay, this has been another session of Biblical Theology, Exegesis, and Hermeneutics, where meaning is always driven by the context. Please like, share, comment, and subscribe. You guys, I think you need to click here on subscribe, and you need to start making some comments here. And please engage. I will respond to questions and anything you would have to say, and all comments, constructive or instructive, intended for me to have a different point of view. I welcome everything here. I don't claim to know it all. I'm just trying to work with what I got.